In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to use Substance in Unreal Engine 4. The Substance plugin allows you to work with Substance materials in UE4. You can also directly browse and import substances from Substance source, as well as establish a live link with Substance Painter. The first thing that you'll need to do is install the Substance plugin. The Substance plugin is free on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. In 4.19 or higher, you'll find prompts to download the Substance plugin. So here in the content browser, if I go to the Add New option and I choose Substance, you'll see a window appear that gives me a link to install the Substance plugin. Also, if I'm inside the Unreal Engine Material Editor, you'll see a Substance button at the top toolbar. If I click this button, again, you'll see the same prompt. Here I'm going to choose to install the Substance plugin. So I'll click this link. This is going to open the Marketplace. And here I have the Substance plugin. So here I'll click Install the Engine to install the plugin, and then restart the Unreal Editor. So here I have the realistic rendering scene, which is a demo project created by Epic Games. And now that I have the Substance plugin installed, I can start adding substances here to this scene. Now there's two ways that we can add substances. We can import them directly, or we could use Substance Source by clicking this button to browse the Substance Source library and download substances directly to our project. First, let's take a look at importing a substance. So I'm going to come over to the Import button, and here I'm just going to browse for an sbsar file. That's a substance material file. And so I have a list here. I'm going to use this parquet wood mahogany. So we'll open this, and here we get the Substance import options. Here we can set a name for the Substance instance. I'm just going to leave it at default. And we also can set a name for the material that's going to be generated. What the Substance plugin uses the Substance engine to compute textures that are then plugged into a shader in UE4. So the material that's being generated is just a typical UE4 material that's being fed texture inputs from the Substance engine. So with Substance, you're not using a shader, you're just using texture outputs. So now that I have this set, I'll just click Import, and you can see the assets have been added here to the content browser. Now here you'll notice that we have a material. So I'm going to double click this here to open up the material editor, and here you can see that we have just a UE4 material, and the Substance outputs have been computed and they're plugged into the channel inputs of the material. So for example, here we have our base color, here we have our normal, here's our roughness, and here is metallic. I could add new nodes in here to further augment this material. So here I'm just going to close this for now, and we're not going to save anything. Here we have the Substance graph instance. So if I double click this, you can see here that we have all of the parameters for the substance. We'll come back to that in just a moment. And then here we have our Substance instance factory. So if I right click this, you can see that I have some options to re-import this substance, create a graph instance of this material, or delete with instances and outputs. So let's get this material into our scene. Simply just drag and drop the material right onto the asset. So I'm going to come over to the Substance graph instance, double click to open up the parameters, and here you can see the output size. I'm going to change the resolution here to 2048. So the Substance engine has now recomputed the resolution of that texture, and here you can see that we're now viewing a 2K resolution. Now we can go in and start to change any of these parameters so that we can completely rework the Substance material itself. So for example, I'm going to change this X amount for the pattern tile. And as I do this, you can see that the Substance automatically regenerates the texture. Next thing I think I'll do is just come over here to my wood roughness, and here let's just drop this value so we get a bit more gloss here on this wood floor. We could also come over here and change our pattern type. So let's switch this here to something like square basket. And here again, I think I'll just change my X amount here on the pattern tile. I can also come into here and start to change the color. And we'll click OK to that. And we could continue to change the parameters to get any number of variations that we want to get. Now here at the top of the parameters, we have our outputs. And you'll notice that only the base outputs are enabled by default to generate the material. However, we also have a height. So let's say, for example, I wanted to generate this height so that I could work with displacement or create some parallax occlusion. I could click this output, and here in the content browser, you can see that the texture was generated for me here just by clicking that output. So we'll just close the image editor here for now. So I've imported my substance without much work at all. I've changed the resolution, I've changed some parameters to get a different look on this wood floor material here for my scene. So now I would like to use Substance Source to find a material that I can use to texture this wall asset here in my scene. So at the top of the UI, I'll click the Substance Source button to launch Source. Now, Substance Source is available to those on Substance subscriptions. So here I've logged into my algorithmic account, and now I can browse the entire Substance Source library. So here in my search, I'm just going to start to type in stucco, and this is going to filter for me, and I'm going to use this brush stucco material. So let's just click the thumbnail. Let's get a good idea of what this material is going to look like. Here I'll press this right arrow button. This allows me to view the output maps, and this looks like what I want to use. So here I'm just going to click this download button, and that's going to download this substance directly here to my content browser. So let's close the Substance Source window, and here you can see in the content browser the brush stucco material is selected. So I'll just left click, and I'm going to drag and drop that here onto this wall asset to apply the material. Let's come over here to the Substance Graph instance, and let's set our resolution. So here, let me just move the window here so we can see the viewport, and I'm going to set this to be 2048 as well. And so now the textures have been recomputed to the higher resolution, and now I have my stucco material here for my wall. So here I have another substance that I downloaded from Substance Source, this bull leather. So we'll double click to take a look at this material. And you'll notice here that this material, here are the substance outputs, but this material didn't have any substance parameters to help me to tile the texture. So here I just added a few nodes that allowed me to tile these substance inputs. So I'm using a text chord and multiplying it by a constant value so that I could tile these substance outputs. So here what I might do in this case is let's just convert this here to a parameter. And so for the parameter name, we'll just call this tile. And then let's set a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 20. And then we'll just save the material here. And now let's just close out this window. And then here on the material that was generated by the substance, we're just going to right click and create a material instance out of this. And this time we'll just call this red leather. And then here, let's zoom in on this couch and let's just replace it here. So we'll just replace our leather. And then we'll double click here. This is our material instance. And we can come over here to our tile parameter. And now we can adjust our tile. So here, let me just move this guy out of the way so we can see this a little bit more clearly. And again, here we have that tile parameter. So as I mentioned earlier, the substance is just generating the output, and we can continue to configure that material by adding our own custom nodes to build the exact shader that we want. So now let's take a look at one other example. Here I have this carpet. Again, this is a material that I downloaded from Substance Source. And so if we take a look at the material itself, so here's our material. Here in this section, I have the substance outputs from the material. Here I have another output. This is the height. So here, if I just minimize the material editor, and I'm going to come over to the carpet's substance graph instance. So I'll double click. You can see here for the output, I enabled that height. And here, let's just browse for that in our content browser. And here's what that height map looks like. So we'll just close that for now. Not going to save anything. And let's jump back over to our material. There I have the substance outputs. Again, here I'm using the text chord, and I'm multiplying that by a constant value, and I'm tiling all of my substance outputs. And so here I have a few nodes that are set up to help me create the inputs that I need here for my world displacement and my tessellation multiplier. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking here the red channel out of my height texture, and I'm multiplying that by a distance value that I have here. This is just a constant. And then I'm multiplying that result by the vertex normal world space. And that is being fed here into my world displacement. And here for the tessellation multiplier, I just have a constant value set. In my case, I didn't expose these as parameters and create an instance material. But again, this just serves as another example where I was able to build upon the material that was first generated by the Substance plugin in order to get the exact shader that I wanted for my material. So then we'll just close the material. Here again, you can see that's asking me to save, so I'll click save. You want to make sure that you save all of your changes that you make. For example, if you are on a substance graph and you make any changes to your parameters, you're going to want to click save here. You could also just hit the save all button to save all content along with any of the substance parameter updates. So the last thing I'd like to cover is some of the project settings for the Substance plugin. So here, let's go to Edit, and we'll go to Project Settings. And then let's scroll down to where we have Plugins, and we'll click the Substance option. So there's a few options here. So if you look at memory budget, if we increase this value, that just helps speed up the responsiveness. We also have here the Substance engine. So there's two variants of the engine. We have the CPU and the GPU engine. The CPU engine can produce up to 4K textures. However, the GPU engine can go up to 8K textures. Also, the GPU engine is faster to compute in most cases. So depending on your needs, you may want to just switch this to the GPU engine. It will require the editor to restart in order to take effect. Lastly, here we have the default generation mode for substances. The Substance Generation Mode, SGM, controls how the textures are generated. This is a global setting for substances. The SGM can be changed on a per substance basis on the Substance Factory, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So for SGM Baked, this bakes the substance textures and you lose the ability to change parameters at runtime. SGM on Load Sync blocks the application while the substances are loading. SGM on Load Sync and Cache caches an intermediate result of the texture on disk. Unload Async is non-blocking to the application. Substances are generated in the background. Substance on Load Async and Cache caches an intermediate result of the texture on disk. Load Async and Cache is what the Substance Generation Mode defaults to, but you can use this menu option to change that behavior. So like I said, these generation modes affect the substances at a global level, and if you want to be able to set a specific generation mode per substance, you can do that on the Substance Factory. So let's take a look at that. So for example, I'm going to come over here to the carpet loop substance. So this is the instance factory, denoted here by the green icon. If I right click here, you'll notice that I have this asset actions option. Here I'm going to move over to the bulk edit via property matrix option. So I'll left click on this. And here on the far right, you'll see that we have a drop down menu. And if I click this drop down, here we have the generation mode. So here by default, you can see that it's set to SGM platform default, which as I said, defaults to load async and cache. But if we want to change that to, let's say, SGM baked, we can do that. Now this carpet loop substance generation mode has been set to baked. So that's going to close out this basic tutorial on Substance in UE4. In this video, we talked about installing the Substance plugin, importing Substance files, using Substance Source to browse for substances and download them directly here into our content browser. We also took a look at a few examples on how we were able to open up a material that was generated by the Substance plugin and add additional nodes to further extend the capabilities of that shader. And lastly, we looked at changing the Substance Generation mode as part of the Substance project settings on a global basis as well as on a per substance material. We also have detailed documents on how to use Substance in UE4 at our Substance Integrations documentation space, which covers everything I discussed here and much more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.